Paola, thanks so much for the kind introduction. My name is Frank Gillett. I'm a vice president for Future Consumer on our team for devices and consumer. And I'm going to talk to you today about the future of consumers in a digital-first world. We believe that marketers, strategists, and investors need a better consumer-first perspective. And that's because the existing technology, product perspectives are too narrow. They're too close in to catch emerging change across a consumer's life. And if you look at traditional market or industry analyses that are good for steady state, they don't catch disruptions where markets blend or disappear. So IDC is creating research now with the consumer as the focus to detect and predict new purchase categories, distribution models, market models, digital culture, norms, and societal shifts. Now, we're going to do this by looking at 8 key activities for future consumers. And our goal is to do this around the world. Now, I'm speaking to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts in the United States. Pero habla español un poco suficiente para mejorar mi entendencia del mundo. So we will make sure that our research has global perspective in addition to the latest from what we see in the United States. And we will draw in research from all regions to enhance our global perspective, including from Latin America. So these are the 8 key activities. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of them today, but let me just briefly talk about how broad these activities are and the way they build around a consumer's life. So well-being, for example, is healthcare, as well as personal fitness, nutrition, a broad category of the way consumers take care of themselves. Entertainment, quite broad, including social media, gaming. Housing, of course, is about where we live. Travel and dining, the fun things we do when we go out to eat or when we travel to see other places. Personal mobility will look at how consumers change the way they travel to work for pleasure, and how technology is enabling them to reimagine ride sharing, electric scooters, and other new ways of getting around or accessing transit. I will talk about money and shopping in a moment, and lifelong learning is about the ways in which you, as a consumer, use technology, not just in school, but before school, after graduating, and for lifelong work, training, and pleasure. So let's take a look at money. We see digital wallets and new providers remaking money and payments. The COVID pandemic really changed how people use technology, and in many markets, people used less cash and used their phone more, and they used peer-to-peer payment apps such as Venmo even more than before. In the US, and in some markets, particularly with affluent consumers, we see that once the terminals reach critical mass, consumers leave home just with their smartphone and leave their wallet or purse at home and carry just their government ID and a key card or two beyond that. And we see alternative organizations, startups, telcos, and postal authorities expanding banking alternatives, because digital technology now enables them to more easily set up banking as allowed in their specific country. Now, if we look at shopping, we see a big move by retailers towards digital first, because consumers are changing their buying patterns. In many markets, COVID drove a big shift for delivery orders of things like groceries and household items, and really increased the number of consumers that retailers had digital relationships with, where there was a username and a password. In the US, there's a venture capital fueled experiment with so-called dark grocery stores, which means it's a store full of groceries, but only the employees can go in because the orders come in for instant delivery to have it delivered by an employee, typically on an electric bicycle, within 30 minutes. Several of these have already gone bankrupt, but there are more that are doing experiments in the Northeast United States, in New York and Boston. We now see that many durable goods brick and mortar stores, such as Best Buy with electronics, now will match online prices to combat showrooming. That's the idea that a consumer comes in to look, touch, feel, choose the product, and then goes home and orders off Amazon or another online retailer. Naturally, the brick and mortar store really wants to capture that sale, and they are. So with that brief introduction, I want to tell you about 3 streams of future consumer research. We've got consumer pulse, the consumer market model, and the future consumer agenda. I'm going to briefly tell you about each of these research streams. The consumer pulse surveys for insights on consumer behavior around the world. And I'm going to tell you with this slide, we're looking for insights into their behavior, self-reported, their attitudes, the way they think, what they say they're actually spending on, what the share of wallet is that they're allocating to online versus brick and mortar stores, and brand trust. We're doing this in 7 countries, and you can see Brazil is one of the 7 countries that we're looking at. And we will begin publishing these surveys quarterly, beginning late this quarter and ongoing. The second stream of research is around this consumer market model. This is an update of an existing model that IDC has had for some time that publishes worldwide and 51 country data set mapping to these 8 future consumer segments and including 5-year forecasts of consumer digital activity, spending, and hours across a wide range of technologies. And if we look at a little more detail of what the model looks at, we capture the socioeconomic profile, the number of internet users in a household, what kind of internet access they have, what devices they use, hours spent online, etc. So a fair amount of detail. And now I want to share with you some global numbers. When we look at aggregate spend on digital services and e-commerce, so online value as well as the spend for goods delivered in the real world. So there's over 6 billion internet users by the model's estimate, and 400 billion spent on digital services, plus 9 billion spent on B2C e-commerce. Entertainment growth rates in the next 3 years will be significant, almost 10%. And I was personally stunned by the large size of the sharing economy numbers that we see globally, 28 billion on car sharing and 16 billion for home task services. Now, let's take a look at Latin America. These are the 7 regions we look at, and then we call Japan a region as well, but Japan on its own is the 8th one that's not on this slide, but it gets its own regional look. So if we look at Latin America, in 2026, we see that because new modes of internet access are driving user growth faster in Latin America will be 63% of all users in the Americas, with 624 million internet users, versus North America with 37% and 361 million. So the Latin American market is almost 2/3 of all internet users in the Americas. Now, if we look for a little comparison and contrast and zoom in on just digital services, so think movie streaming and other forms of digital delivery that do not involve physical goods, the market in Latin America is larger than in North America, but it will grow more slowly. So in Latin America, in 2026, we see 80 billion in spending. And between now and 2026, as you see in the bottom left, it will be an 11% growth rate. And you can see on average, 71% of that spending will be on mobile devices, compared to North America with 63 billion in spending, a higher growth rate though of 19% between now and 26, with even a bit more on mobile devices, that is 76%. Now I want to take one look into the model for a regional example across the 8 countries where we break out specific data. And you can see that the spending in each of these 6 countries. But what I really want to focus you on in our brief time here is the percent that is on desktop or mobile. And the first 2 are the biggest contrast. So in Argentina, 56% of spending of the 3 billion in Argentina is spent on desktops, that is PCs, which means only 44% on mobile, versus Brazil, double, 88% is on mobile rather than on PC or desktop. And I'll let you look at the slides to see the details across the other countries, but it's really interesting to see the significant variations across Latin America. So let's bump to the third stream of research on future consumer, which is the Future Consumer Agenda. And this is a thought leadership program to look at the big picture shifts we see across the future consumer. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And I'm particularly excited about it because this is the research that I'm helping to lead. So globally, consumers actually represent about 2/3 of all global economic activity. And of course, digital, as we've all experienced, is really changing and disrupting how people lead their lives and the way companies work with consumers. So IDC is launching a new service to look at this, and we will combine analysis about near-term evolution with a look at the vision and scenarios for 5 to 10 years out, the big strategic picture. So here's a recap all on one slide of the 3 streams of future consumer research: Consumer Pulse with survey in 7 key global countries, including Brazil; the consumer market model with detailed global data, including specific data for 51 countries with 6 in Latin America; and the Future Consumer Agenda with the thought leadership and strategic perspective. So let's look at 10 tech trends. I wrote a report about trends that we're looking at, and I'm going to share 2 with you today before we go to Q&A. The first one is around new pricing and business models that we see in North America and in other countries. The easiest way to talk about this is subscriptions. And with the move to software as a service, of course, we've seen the shift in, say, Microsoft Office from being a product that you buy a license for once every few years to being an annual subscription that in the US costs $100 per year for a family subscription for 5 seats, 5 or 6. So software as a service really kind of introduced the notion of subscription, but we're now seeing a much broader take on that. And of course, we saw music shift to subscription from, quote, owning in the model that we were used to when we played round discs. Now, of course, we subscribe to Spotify or iTunes or Amazon Music. And what we see then basically is consumers now are being asked to pay in 2 ways, either with their attention to tolerate advertisements or to pay for a subscription that hopefully eliminates the advertisements, but sometimes only reduces them. And the important thing here is to remember that every time you see an app or a web page, it's a service. It is an ongoing experience for the consumer. And so this whole notion of a free app is one that we're still all trying to get over. Now, the challenge as more and more things move to subscription is that consumers will have too many subscriptions. So one of the dynamics we see is people subscribing to Netflix, for example, for a month to capture a series they're really interested in and then canceling it. So one of the responses to this challenge of too many services and consumers quickly canceling them is bundling. So we see Amazon Prime is an example of a service that bundles in not just free shipping, but access to a certain amount of movies, a certain amount of online storage, photo capabilities. Apple One, which bundles together 6 of Apple's online services that are a combination of content, storage, and news, among other things. And Google One now is a similar equivalent. We've even seen products, that is physical goods, moving to a subscription model. So one thing you might have seen is with the Fitbit, which Google now owns, or the Amazon Halo, they now have an optional, semi-required subscription if you want to get the most out of your device. And even Apple, with the Apple Watch, now has the Fitness Plus service that is part of that Apple One bundle that I mentioned earlier. But the next click above that is entirely subscription-based hardware. And so there's a Boston area startup called Whoop doing a fitness tracker, which is popular with celebrity athletes and with hardcore fitness buffs. And you don't buy the device. You sign up for a subscription with Whoop and they mail you a device, and they mail you a new device every 2 or 3 years as they upgrade the technology, or if the product fails. So there's no notion of ever purchasing the product, just subscribing to the service. And we see the expensive Peloton exercise bike in the US with a new CEO began experimenting in March with a pure subscription model where you don't ever own the bicycle, you simply use it, pay for it until you're done, and then they come and pick it up. So I wrote a short piece about that for clients to describe and analyze that perspective, and to talk about the fact that strong rumors suggest that Apple will offer an iPhone subscription soon as well. Now, the key thing about this is that we see this big shift from transactions with consumers to relationships, and from products, even physical products, to experiences. So we believe that the market, the behavior shifts that consumers are embracing and the way the companies respond will cause services to consolidate into a few large platforms with a bundle of services, and it will be tough for smaller specialists to survive. They will have to be, like Peloton, quite strong. So one of the eventual destinations for both Peloton and Whoop may be into one of the bigger platform companies. Now, with the time we've got, let me take a look at one other tech trend in a little bit of depth, and then we'll move to key takeaways and some Q&A. So we've been seeing a lot of news about augmented and virtual reality. Now, all the excitement about the metaverse is, of course, a bunch of hype that will eventually come to pass, but is still pretty early. So there's been a lot of challenge, and we see that Apple and Qualcomm are really still racing hard to build chips powerful enough to create these natural experiences without killing phone batteries. So what we're going to see in the near term is augmented reality overlays that is enabling you, as this engineer in the photo is doing, to hold up your phone and see extra information. The virtual reality goggles, like the Facebook now Meta Quest, those are going to enable stationary experiences, but that's, to my mind, going to be less important. More important is going to be the augmented reality. And the thing that I think will have more utility is what I've called smart audio. So we see more and more people wearing earbuds, and I think we're going to see phones now delivering key information into your ears at key moments, like as you arrive in an intersection, telling you to turn right when you see the Walgreens pharmacy sign. So I think the smart audio, because of so many people already have wireless earbuds, will show up before we see broad use of augmented reality eyeglasses, which is a more complex and expensive technology. And clearly, as this stuff builds out, we'll see this evolve towards these ideas of the metaverse. But in the short run, Think in terms of smartphone augmented reality overlays, as you see with Google Maps, and that smart audio idea that probably a couple of years away. All right, so let's wrap up with what we've talked about. Companies need a future consumer framework to predict and find market changes that the existing models don't help them detect. And I talked about the streams of research we have to attack that. Latin American consumer users will be a very large market, 624 million by 2026, growing at 11% between now and then in digital services, specifically to reach 80 billion in spend on digital services. And there are key tech trends that shape and engage consumers. And the most important one I told you about today is this whole idea of subscriptions, engagement, relationship, loyalty and membership programs, really driving and building deep relationship and engagement. So with that, I want to thank Paola for inviting me to speak with you today. And I'm looking forward to taking your questions and hearing what you're interested in for helping us drive better research on the future consumer.